The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Says I have the gentleman. Yes, go ahead. I yield to the gentleman from Ohio, the chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, Mr. Joyce, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the continuing resolution. Every member of this body has a duty to ensure that the core constitutional responsibilities of our government are funded. That work is not easy. Our Democrat colleagues will, of course, have different views on the top-line spending levels, and we will have to work through those sharp differences in spending and policy preferences. Republicans already passed 7 fiscal year 2024 bills through the House outlining our priorities. Each of those bills was considered individually and allowed members of both parties to offer amendments considered on the merits. Passing bills through regular order is not as clean or as easy as we'd like it to be, but it is a better alternative than one huge omnibus bill passed right before Christmas. There's no question about it. More work will be required to enact all 12 appropriation bills into law. The bill before us gives us the time necessary to agree on a top-line spending amount and negotiate difficult policy choices in the final fiscal year 2024 appropriation bills. I want to take this opportunity to thank the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Granger, for her knowledge, her leadership, and tireless efforts to bring these appropriation bills to the floor, and I look forward to working alongside her as we finish the fiscal year 2024 spending bills. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio yields. The gentlewoman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the chairman of Agriculture Subcommittee, Dr. Harris, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support H.R. 6363, a bill that would keep the government operating while putting Congress on a path toward fiscal responsibility. We simply can't continue to pass large, bloated omnibus appropriations bills just before Christmas, and this bill is a new approach to break the cycle. Moody's changed the outlook of the nation's debt on Friday to negative. Rising interest rates from Bidenomics, the sharp increase in public debt, and a lack of agreement on measures to reduce the public deficit led to that downgrade. This should be a wake-up call for all of us. This bill gives us time to complete our work in a fiscally responsible manner while working toward a more normal appropriations process. Additionally, I'd like to specifically address concerns for funding of the WIC program. I've heard our colleagues on the other side of the aisle use scare tactics and a straw man that this bill does not provide enough funding for WIC in the states. We'll have to have a wait list for participants. Nothing could be further from the absolute truth. Let me remind everyone that provisions in the first CR continue in this bill, so the Department of Agriculture has the authority to maintain WIC participation, period. If states need more money, they should ask USDA for funding, not start wait lists. USDA and OMB have the authority to work together to fully fund the program, and if they don't, it's 100% the fault of the Biden administration. It's shameful that advocacy groups and the Biden administration's team use such scare tactics when they know full well they have the ability to fully fund WIC for the duration of this continuing resolution. I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his leadership in restoring fiscal restraint and supporting a new approach to control spending. I also want to thank Chairwoman Granger for her leadership and dedication in moving the FY24 House appropriations bills forward. The world has taken notice of the unsustainable spending and debt which undermine our credibility as a world leader. I strongly urge my colleagues to support H.R. 6363 to put us on the path to fiscal responsibility and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland yields. The gentlewoman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close. But let me, I don't see Mr. Calvert on the floor. But Mr. Calvert, as you know, is the chair of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee and a very respected member and someone who cares deeply about our national security here at home and our international obligations and responsibilities. But I would just mention a couple of things in this context. As of this bill, $28 billion for the Department of Defense is held up until next February. And that's whether or not we can come to agreement. Next February, $28 billion to the Department of Defense. The other piece of this is that the State Foreign Ops Subcommittee of Appropriations and the Defense Subcommittee have shared responsibilities. And as you know from reading this laddered approach, that those two bills will not get to a continuing resolution until February 2nd. What do they do that has relevance in this period of time? Well, State Foreign Operations it's only a small amount of money, but they have a very small amount of money in which they can move humanitarian assistance in this global crisis that we have and the world clamoring for humanitarian assistance. Now, State Foreign Operations and Defense share some other pieces, which have to do with funding for Ukraine and funding for Israel. So the $3.3 billion to Israel is held up until next February. And money for Ukraine, which we are depleted of, is nowhere to be found. So we walk off the international stage. We have abdicated a moral responsibility to Israel, to Ukraine, not unlike what happened in 1938 with appeasement, and to humanitarian assistance. And I want you to think about who is responsible for that. The other piece of this, which I think is very, very interesting, because we have seen the delay. There's been 5 months since we had the budget agreement in June. So 5 months of delay, another 45 days of delay. I don't understand, and I said a few moments ago, given what we've seen on the floor with regard to labor age today, what is going to change in this next go-round? There are every opportunity for further delays. Further delays. What happens then is we move toward something called sequestration. And let me translate it into real terms. Those are across-the-board cuts in every single area, both domestic and international. That is what the law has done here. And there appears to be no understanding or no consideration for the movement of where we need to go. We have a history now of delay after delay after delay. And I don't see anything that portends a change in that activity or behavior. Final thing I would say is that with those across-the-board cuts, if all of the appropriations bills are not passed, not 8, not 4, if all 12 are not passed, and there's one hanging out there, that across-the-board cut comes crashing down on our heads. So I think people just need to know this information and fully understand. I don't want a government shutdown. I don't. But I want to fully understand what the stakes are. And I have to believe that every member of this body wants to know what the stakes are and what is actually in these bills. And finally, I would say is, and I'm going back to something I said earlier, who is holding up the resources that the American people are clamoring for, whether it's their health, whether it's their education, with their ability for a job. And every bill that we've seen on this floor curtails and cuts back in a remarkable way. And the Labor HH bill, you take us back to numbers in 2008, so that the resources that the American public needs to thrive, people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. And we are doing nothing to deal with helping them with their cost of living. Nothing to deal with their cost of living. And I believe that they know that. So on the domestic front, we are shortchanging the American people. Let's get to the international scene. Who is holding up aid to Israel? Who is holding up funding the support for Ukraine? When did we believe that Vladimir Putin has noble intentions? He would gobble it up in a nanosecond. Who would believe who was holding up humanitarian assistance? Our moral responsibility, watching children in Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, dying, and we don't have the strength to blow past this and say, let's do what we have been charged to do by this Constitution and carry out our duty. And I just say to you, House Republicans are holding up all of these critical security funding needs. Think about it. And think about how we should break a logjam with people who know better in this institution. Get us those top-line numbers. Get us the allocations. Get the appropriations process on track. Fund the bills for 2024. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 6363 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
Gentlewoman, the yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Pursuant to House Resolution 864 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 5894. Will the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 5894, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 5894, a bill making appropriations for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 76, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272, offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, had been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 118-272, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Ms. Miller of Illinois. Amendment number 28 by Mr. Good of Virginia. Amendment number 32 by Mr. Good of Virginia. Amendment number 33 by Mr. Rosendale of Montana. Amendment number 35 by Mr. Mills of Florida. Amendment number 55 by Mr. Good of Virginia. Amendment number 69 by Mr. Biggs of Arizona. Amendment number 70 by Mr. Biggs of Arizona. Amendment number 71 by Mr. Biggs of Arizona. Amendment number 76 by Mr. Biggs of Arizona. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Miller, on which further proceedings were postponed and which ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mrs. Miller of Illinois.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Ready? Still in the well. We're all set?
Now you got Waltz as well.
Oh, now we have Waltz. Now we have some Waltz.
Mr. Waltz.
Votes aye.
Mr. Waltz votes aye.
Hammond. Hammond.
Mrs. Kamick.
Votes aye.
Mrs. Kamick votes aye.
I got you.
What's another one? I don't know what she, ask her if she's voting on this one. All right. Closed. 131 to 300.
On this vote, the yeas are 131, the nays are 300. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 28, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good, on which further proceedings were postponed, and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 28, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Good of Virginia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 190, the nays are 241. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 32, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good, on which further proceedings were postponed, and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 32, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Good of Virginia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 140, the nays are 294. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 33, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
3, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Rosendale of Montana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 183, the nays are 251. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 35, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 35, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Mills of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 186, the nays are 247. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 55, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 55, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Good of Virginia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. Seconds. Members voted. Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Carson. Mr. Carson votes no. On this vote, the yeas are 109, the nays are 324. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 69, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 69, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. All members voted. Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 85, the nays are 350. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 70, printed in Part B, House Report 118-272, by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, in which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 70, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 81, the nays are 353. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 71, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 71, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
All members voted. Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 81, the nays are 354. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 76, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 76, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 118, the nays are 316. The amendment is not adopted. What purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee do now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 5894, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 5894 and has come to no resolution thereon. Proceedings will now resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. The motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6363 and agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal if ordered. Electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Granger, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6363 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 6363, a bill making further continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2024 and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
1 minute remaining. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change your vote? On this vote, the yeas are 336, the nays are 95. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Make sure it says today.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the Journal stands approved. Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
Pursuant to House Resolution 864 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 5894. Will the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole, House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 5894, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making appropriations for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for the purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, Amendment number 76, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272, offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, had been disposed of. Okay. The committee will be in order. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 78, printed in Part B of House Report 118-272. For what purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 78, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-272, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 864, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment halves the funding for the taxpayer-funded activists at the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board is supposed to act to prevent and remedy unfair labor practices committed by private sector employees and employers and unions. Unfortunately, under the Biden administration, the NLRB has been filled with labor activists who seek only to empower union bosses at the expense of employees, employers, and consumers. Moreover, the recent actions represent substantial executive overreach to implement a radical agenda so toxic that it could not be achieved by this administration when they had both chambers of Congress or by the Obama administration with a filibuster-proof majority. The fact that this agenda is so radical and out of touch with the American people that it's been routinely rejected by the people's representatives should be the end of this conversation, but it's not. Instead, the Biden administration seeks, through executive fiat, to impose the PRO Act that failed to pass legislatively. Just this year, the Biden NLRB has issued the following PRO Act provision by fiat: Joint Employer Standard, which destroys the franchise model and eliminates independent contractors. Thank you very much. Ambush elections, which shortens the timeline for elections to prevent employees from making fully informed decisions about whether to unionize or not. And card check, which eliminates secret ballot elections and ensures union bosses can intimidate and lie their way to certification. Immediately after taking office, President Biden fired the NLRB General Counsel, Peter Robb, even though he had 10 months remaining in his term, and he was replaced with an acting general counsel, an end around to the constitutional advice and consent process. The radical acting official rescinded pro-employee memos that protected employees' rights not to fund union activity, provided injured workers with remedies when they were injured due to union malfeasance, and challenged neutrality agreements as improper efforts by employers to support a union and eliminate the right of its employees to decide whether or not to organize. These actions lay bare the truth that the NLRB is not living up to its mission, nor is it looking out for the interests of its workers. Instead, it's implementing a radical, deeply unpopular agenda through extra-constitutional means at the behest of leftist special interests. Stand up for the American people and stop this madness. I reserve.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut rise? Seek recognition.
Mr. Chair, I claim the time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. The underlying bill already cuts NLRB funding by 1/3. That is, for people's information, the lowest nominal appropriation since 1999 and the lowest appropriation in real terms in at least 5 decades, 50 years. A further reduction would mean mass furloughs, reduction in force, and the closure of field offices. In terms of scale, a $100 million cut equates to total compensation for more than 500 FTEs. That's roughly 40% of the NLRB workforce. I guess that's where you all want to go. Combined with the $99 million cut in the base text, the agency would lose roughly 80% of its staff capacity. Case processing would grind to a halt, even as the agency faces a backlog following last year's 10% increases in case intake. Let's talk about cases. Let's talk about unfair labor practice. We should ignore unfair labor practices, according to the majority. We should not concern ourselves with employers who ignore collective bargaining rights, because, quite frankly, I don't believe the majority believes in collective bargaining rights. That really thwarts economic policy. That leaves people on their own, people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who's fundamentally concerned with their cost of living. We just make it worse for them. But I believe that this follows a Republican philosophy: anti-worker, anti-union, anti-working family. It really about sums it up, and that's what sums up this amendment. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do applaud the chairman of this committee for making the cuts to the NLRB that he has made. They should be made. Obviously, the NLRB is running amok. Too much time on their hands, too many resources. Did my colleague on the other side not hear the list of infractions? It'd be fine. It would be absolutely fine if the NLRB focused on unfair labor practices and dealt with that. But that is their mission, but that's not their focus. Their focus is expanding the force of big labor everywhere that they can and shutting out the little guy and removing the choice of average citizens of how they want to work and how they want to be represented, which is why they need to be hemmed in. That's just a simple fact of it. And if it takes it back to the point where they are only focusing on unfair labor practices, then I think we will have done our job well. This amendment actually strengthens the chairman's position in negotiations with the Senate when this bill comes to that negotiation. And so I urge all members to vote in favor, and I reserve.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves his time. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
I continue to oppose this amendment, but it's really very, very interesting. We are in the year 2023. We have a budget for this year. And maybe this is news to the gentleman, but in a bipartisan way, where the NLRB had been flat funded for decades, on a bipartisan basis, we came together and increased the funding for the NLRB. So all of these pejoratives that you're spewing about the NLRB, that your colleagues, your Republican colleagues on the committee from last year voted to increase funding for the NLRB. But I don't believe that the Republican majority cares much about the goals. That is about dealing with worker complaints, dealing with basic fundamental collective bargaining rights. And I think you believe in thwarting people's economic opportunity for the future. Otherwise, you would not